But what
Yeah.
about for those of us who aren't privileged enough to live in the center of the
I know.
universe where OMD happens to be located? Like, does any of the resources there, would that apply to the tech and the EMRs we're using out west or elsewhere?
Yeah. So the top three EMRs across the country are the same, right? So Telus, Acuro, and Oscar. Well, so those are the top three, regardless of which province you're looking at. So our conferences are open to anyone. So the tips that are OMD educates at lunchtime, where we talk about technology and functionality and privacy and security. It's open to everyone. Now, mind you, privacy and security is going to change depending on the province because you have different
Mhm.
regulations, but the general concepts are the same across the province. So there are opportunities at that point. If you want that one-on-one right now, it's really not available, like, because we're very Ontario based and that's how we're funded. But having said that, there's nothing to say that you can't advocate the same with your PTMA or your provincial organization, or even, so here we're starting to have our OHTs, our Ontario Health Teams. I know in BC, you've got your authorities. Other provinces have other areas. So there's nothing to stop clinicians or physicians going to one of those organizations and saying, why don't we set up something similar for this area? And there's nothing stopping us from coming and helping you set that up. But that one-on-one, we stay within Ontario.
How did you keep the funding for this going? Like initially it was for
Yeah,
EMRs. How did you convince Ontario Health to actually like keep this going? Because it sounds
I
like
know.
something that every province would benefit greatly from having.
Yeah. So I think, so that was before my time. I've only been in this position for 3 years. And as you know, the EMR funding dried up a long time ago. But I think it's pivoting. It's pivoting for the needs of our funders. So our funders was Ministry of Health, and now it's Ontario Health. And that's how our funding comes. So we're actually funded for their priorities. So initially was EMRs, but now that it's more digital tech related or privacy and security related or patient summary, interoperability, integrating, those are their priorities. And so a lot of those priorities require physician input and buy-in, and they require tools to work. And because we've developed this amazing program for change management and adoption and vendor management, it only makes sense that you would want to fund us to help you move your priorities. And that's ultimately what we're funded for. But because we have this change management and it requires education for onboarding, we're able to do all this also as part of that funding. Because if you don't do that, and I just come into your office and say, I've got this great tool for you, you're going to slam the door in my face because I'm not meeting your needs and we don't have that trust. And I think you need to build trust before you can come in and say, this is what's coming. And I have to say, we're pretty honest. Like our peer leaders, they're not staff, but they're docs and they're pretty honest. And when something doesn't work and they don't like what we have to onboard, they're going to tell us that. And they're going to give that
Yeah.
feedback and they're going to be like, there's no way I'm going to use it. So there's no way I'm going to tell someone else to use it. And I think that's really valuable feedback to go back to the funders to kind of say, how do we make this better?
What kind of digital tech, the non-EMR stuff
Yeah.
are you guys working on recently?
Yeah.
What does that actually look like?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So right now we're doing an AI scribe project. So I'm not sure if you've heard about that. And that seems to be like the new sexy tech that's on the horizon. Anything AI is going to solve all our problems, right?
Big fan
Uh,
personally of all these AI scribes. I think it's
I
a game
know.
changer.
It's a game changer, but you know what? It's still a technology and it still has to meet your needs, right? And it still has to solve your problems. And so right now, I'm going to back up. So when the EMRs came out, there was no regulation. It was just like, here's an EMR and they're going to come to your office and you're going to sign a contract and you're going to take it. And there was no like, pick these EMRs. This EMR is better in the long term. These ones are going to integrate better. Like we didn't, like hindsight is 2020. Is that what they say? So at the time, it was just like, go crazy. And I know BC has something like 20 EMRs or maybe 25 or 30. Ontario has 13, even with our certification and other, right? So it's kind of like, it was kind of a wild west before we said, okay, hang on. And that's kind of the way I look at AI, right? So AI is kind of going direct to physicians and clinics, and they're saying, look at all the things we can do with your EMR and your data. And scribing is unbelievable. But we need to kind of rein that in a bit and say, well, hang on. let's look at the evaluation of it. So our project is to actually look at evaluation of AI Scribe. So what do AI scribes, all of them, need to have to be a functional, good product? Where are the gaps? What about that contract? What are we signing away without understanding it? Where should we look for, like, what should we ask about our data and our data governance? Like things that we're not really equipped to think of as docs in our clinics. So that's what this AI Scribe project we're doing, and it should be wrapping up by midsummer. Well, will have an evaluation and an approach to AI Scribe at least, and then what we're hoping is then we can actually look at other AI as it becomes more available. Um, so that's the most exciting thing. Then we're kind of looking at our other stuff. So in Ontario, we have HRM, Hospital Report Manager, which is kind of sending reports that come through the hospital, bypasses the fax and goes directly into our EMR, right? Really, so you might be thinking, that's a great technology to have, right? You don't have to fax, it goes right into your EMR. But, in retrospect, now we're realizing that's creating this huge burden, because before, when a discharge summary was 3 pages, now it's 15 pages. And it's all coming in because you can click anything and just send it. And now the receiving docs and clinicians are just overwhelmed. So a lot of what we're doing now is also looking at the technology that exists and seeing, okay, how can we make that better? How can we now backtrack that and make that better?
And that's where that interoperability comes, I guess.
Yes. Yes.
Very cool. And so when it comes to like things like the EMR and the AI scribes, like it's super cool to actually see a central association paying attention to these, because a lot of the places, they're sort of hands off, right? Like,
Yeah.
ooh, vendors and service providers, icky, we got to remain neutral. How do you dive in and then sort of be that contact point and help people navigate those waters
Yeah.
while also still maintaining that vendor neutrality, or that arm's
Yeah.
length?
And I think that's because we have our certification that we're able to do that, right? So if you're going to be an EMR that we're going to talk about, you have to be certified. And so that certification piece kind of allows us to kind of be experts in those certified EMRs and to say, okay, for those that are on Practice Solutions, here it is. And we work very closely with vendors also, which is really good in the sense that there's a trust relationship there also. So mind you, it doesn't mean vendors do everything we want them to do. I mean, that doesn't happen. And doctors are still upset with their EMRs, regardless of which province you're in. I can say that. But it's just one step more than I think that other provinces have, right? So it's kind of that collaboration piece. And like I said, we're pretty honest. Our peer leaders are pretty honest. So when they do their talks, they're not always speaking on behalf of Ontario MD because it's more of an education piece. And they will say, I've tried 3 EMRs and this is why I like this one and why I don't like this one. And as long as I feel that that's a really important piece to be there, right? Like that's how you're going to learn from your peer and what they've tried. So we don't limit what happens in our education sessions because they're independent. Like we are just offering the platforms, we offer the topics, but the speakers aren't always OMD speakers. And I think that's why it comes across as being a bit more balanced at times.
What actually goes into that certification process? Is there some criteria or standards
Yeah.
that need to be met, or is it more
Yeah.
like whoever and whatever it is, but you guys internally getting comfortable using it to say that, okay, we now understand this tech fully?
Yeah. So I think it's a bit of both, but no, there's discrete certification standards. It's on our webpage. And some of them are functional standards, but most of them are technical standards.
Hmm.
So they're probably things that as docs, we don't even realize are important or care that they're important, but at least you know that if you get an EMR, they're there. Things like, this you would care about, like you have to have like a medication module, right? For prescribing, you have to have a billing module. Because not all EMRs have that, right? Or didn't have that in the beginning. You have to be able to migrate the data in and migrate the data out, right? I mean, it's not perfect. There's still trouble leaving an EMR, but at least our certification is the minimum standard. So what it is like, here's the minimum you have to meet. And then what extra you put on top is your book of business. That's why someone would pick vendor A over vendor B is because they've met the minimum, but look at all this other amazing stuff they could do, right? So we're about kind of protecting the minimum based on our standards and criteria. And then the rest is really up to what you choose as a doc in your clinic.
How much goes into looking at like the privacy or the security
A
aspects
lot.
behind these technologies?
Yeah, a lot. So a big chunk of the certification is the privacy and security. And it's not just a one time, okay, it was good today. This is an ongoing thing. So they have to prove that ongoing as they want, if they want to stay certified. So they could lose certification if they're not able to meet these requirements. And the requirements do change slightly depending on what our regulate, like certification is kind of based a little bit on regulations too. So they'll adapt and change. So we've had some vendors say, no, we can't keep up. So then they become decertified. And what that means is if you don't have certification, then yes, you're not one of the certified vendors, but then you also lose access to the provincial assets. And that's why it's really important to be certified, because they don't want any EMR touching their provincial assets. That's not secure privacy wise, because that's the most important thing to them.
Yeah.
And then everything else kind of falls in place.
I'm Dr. Jordan Vollrath, and you've been watching Cherry Live, brought to you by Cherry Health. Please like and subscribe to see more clips like this, or check us out at www.cherry.health, Canada's medical network.